All right, Alex, the floor is yours.
All right. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about some image processing terminology. Some of it you probably hear constantly, others maybe occasionally, and some maybe never before. Depends on what programs you use. And what I'm going to do is cover a list of topics. And this is what the world looks like to me. I have several different image processing programs. I like the way I put this one on upside down so it's not readable. That's kind of how a lot of my image processing seems to be. Okay, let's see if I can advance a slide. Okay, here's the kind of terms I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about saturation. We all at least know a little bit about that, but saturation is kind of a benchmark for some of these other techniques I'll talk about. Synthetic HDR, that's high dynamic range, and the synthetic part means that it's done within a single image, and we have single final stacked image. Vibrance and vividness, I'll talk a little bit about those. Color contrast is an important one. Dehazing is important, and obviously sharpening is important, but so is clarity. Then a little bit about radiance, which probably is more a warning not to use it, as is the Orton effect. And then a little bit about equalization and brilliance. It looks like a lot to cover, but in my rehearsal today, it took about 40 minutes. So we'll see if we can do something similar here. These terms, as I said, are common in the menus. Having tried to research these things, I learned one thing, and that is that people don't like to document processing programs very well. They don't, most don't even tell you what these things do. So if you have a Radiance slider, for instance, it doesn't tell you anywhere. There's no user manual that Radiance does. Furthermore, different programs use the same words differently. I'll show you one version of Radiance here later on, and if I remember, I'll also tell you about another version of what a Radiance tool does. A little bit of warning. Many of these tools lead to rather lead to rather subtle changes in the image you're processing, and they may not, on the Zoom presentation, come through with as much impact on an image as they would if you were actually doing it. And I am going to post this PowerPoint presentation so you can look at it and see on your own screen what it looks like. But a warning, everybody's screen is different. There are no two. I just bought a second screen, and after a whole lot of adjustment is about a match of about 80% to the screen I started with. So if you don't see something, it's either you or Zoom or me. We all can share the blame. Color saturation is my first term, and we all know more or less what that means. It's the amount of a color, or the purity of a color. Say we're working in RGB space. And so in this case, I'm saying it's 8 bits, so X in this set of brackets, RGB bracket, can take on a value from 0 to 255. And this is the red channel, and red is saturated when it has a value of 255. In this case, blue and green have values, or green and blue, have a value of 0. And that puts us right at this end of my diagram here, or my bar here. Now, if we begin by adding more blue, green and blue, and we add them in equal amounts, say if this is 255, 0, 0, then something here might be 255, 120, 120, and 255, 200, 200, and by the end here, we're down to pure white. And this kind of change where you're going toward white from saturation is a change in tint. And the word tint is generally agreed upon to mean this change, but it's also used informally to mean other things. If again we start with 255.00 and we leave the 00s alone and we just decrease the 255, so it's maybe 120.00, 55.00, and 000. This change is called a change in shade. So we have saturation is this value, and then we have various tints which are desaturated, and various shades which are also in fact desaturated. Okay. If we have stars and in our images, which we always seem to have, then the three colors, when any of the three colors reach a value of 255, assuming it's an 8-bit image, and we often encounter values where everything is almost pinned at its high values, such as 255 for all three RGB. All the colors are saturated in that, and the star is a bright white, as we saw from the last diagram. This is generally not desirable. We like to have some color in our stars, so we try to avoid getting anywhere close to the extreme values that can be shown. And if it's 16-bit, then this is 2 raised to the 16th power, and we have a lot more levels. But nonetheless, we don't want to be up toward the area where all three values are very high, which will make our stars white. I usually keep my values at 95% or less of whatever the full dynamic range of the red, blue, and green is. Oversaturated images often look plastic and unreal. So we don't want to saturate our galaxies or our clouds either, nor the stars, of course. This is going to be a quick overview here. We're not going into depth on anything. It's just to give you a feel for things, and if you wanted to research any of them, where you might go to satisfy that need. Let's jump on to single image HDR. Single image HDR is a way to control the dynamic range of an image so that no values are totally saturated or totally black. And we try to spread out all the tones, tints, or shades in between the values. Normally, HDR images, excuse me, HDR images are the result of combining images with different exposures. The Orion Nebula is the one case in our general imaging vocabulary where HDR is required to get the full range of brightnesses that are available in the image. So we might take, depending on our scope's F ratio and our camera parameters and other things, we might take a set of 15-second exposures of the Orion Nebula and another set of 30-second exposures of the Orion Nebula. And then an HDR program would take those two images and combine them, exposing each level within the image, taking from the image that the 15 or 30-second image, taking the parts that best reveal the color and structure in that brightness of that subject. So near the center of the Orion Nebula, for instance, the 15-second would be used, and in the outer reaches of the nebula, the 30-second exposure would be used. That's what true HDR does. Well, single image HDR tries to approximate that, and obviously it doesn't have those images. So it achieves this by using something called tone mapping, or achieves an estimate of it or the look of it by using tone mapping. And tone mapping is just what it sounds like. It takes a set of colors and moves them to a different set of colors. It doesn't move reds to blues or greens to oranges or anything like that. It just kind of stretches out the colors in a way that makes the dynamic of the range of the image look larger. This can be done to compress an image's dynamic range, which is not usually the case for our images. Instead, we normally need to expand the dynamic range of the image. Okay, remember in all of this, our cameras take 16-bit images, most of them, maybe 14-bit images, but our displays are usually 8-bit, our printers are usually 8, maybe 10-bit, but you're working down in the 8 to 10-bit with what you're going to display. And if you put it on the internet, it's going to be 8-bit. So your camera capturing 16 bits is kind of an overkill. It's important to have that data, and later you can press it down to the range you want, and you can emphasize, therefore, the brighter or the darker things more easily if you have that range, and that's what we have. I work in 16-bit images all the time, and only compress it down to 8 bits when I'm ready to put out a JPEG or a PNG file for posting on the internet. I should mention one thing I learned the other night watching somebody else's talk. He went to some page in Photoshop, and I don't use Photoshop, so this was kind of a surprise to me. He went to some back page of setting up Photoshop and said, unless you changed this somewhere along the line, you're working in 8-bit, whether you know it or not. And then he changed it to 16 and continued with his talk. So if you're working using Photoshop, you might want to hunt for where that is if you haven't already done it. Okay, so single image HDR. Here's a case of single image HDR, and you can see how the tones in the image on the left have been mapped to the ones on the right. The dynamic range is much larger over here than it is over here. This was done in a program called Aurora HDR. Not all HDR programs can do this single image HDR, by the way. I think it's an obvious thing that you would want to do in many of your images, at least test whether it's going to make any difference. I should say one other thing about the images you're going to see throughout this presentation, and that is I generally pin the sliders. So if I want to show you what vibrance looks like, I show you the vibrance at 0 on the slider and at 100% on the slider. And that gives you an idea of what kind of thing you can do if you can interpolate in your mind and your eyes between those two. Okay, here's another program, Luminar AI Enhance. And I think this enhancement is largely a tone mapping, a one image HDR. You see it's much more strongly presented in Luminar than it was in the previous program. And so you might want to dial back on this one a bit. I think it's a little too much, but I will again show the entire range of what a program can do to tone map. Okay, that's a quick overview of single image HDR. Next, I'm going to go on to vibrance. Saturation tools apply the saturation throughout the image. All the different tints are moved up in their saturation simultaneously, so that tints that are very nearly saturated will become saturated very quickly by moving a saturation tool around. Unlike saturation, the vibrance adjustment first increases the saturation of the least saturated areas. And as those areas increase, it gathers up more and more of the areas that are more and more saturated and starts to boost them. So it boosts the very unsaturated parts first, then the middle saturation joins in on the slider somewhere maybe about halfway, and they start to increase in saturation. And by the time you reach the 100% in that slider, you pretty well have moved everything up toward, you're adjusting all the saturation levels throughout the image, the low saturation and the high saturation. Commonly you use these two sliders together, both the saturation slider with the vibrance slider. This is one where I don't know whether your terminals will be able to see it, whether Zoom is going to portray it well or not. Here's an original image. It's just like that one I showed you earlier with saturation at this corner and white, totally unsaturated at this other corner. And so this is the original image. Here's the saturation slider. And I think you can see, hopefully you can see, that this saturated area or nearly saturated area over here has been joined by a nearly saturated area here. And this one's nearly saturated, and this one's way up in its saturation. And then it slowly tails off. But if you did it, say, in a percentage-wise, you'd find that this one has a 10% increase in saturation, this has a 20, this has a 30, and this has 40. And by the time you get over here, that multiplier is maybe 100% increase in saturation, but the saturation was 0 to begin with, so it's white. Vibrance, the redder tints are unaffected, and the less red tints are made still redder. So here we had saturated area, which was, this is the true saturation. Saturation slider made this saturated. The vibrance slider at 100% does not make this saturated, but it has increased its saturation a bit over the original. This one a little less, this one less still, and it even less out here, less increase in the saturation. So it tends to increase the less red things more and not to saturate as quickly the medium and high already saturated areas. Here's vividness and what it does. You can see here it's saturated this area, it's saturated this area, it's saturated part of this area, and then the whites now seem to expand from being just down here a bit, or I guess you should look up here a bit, to much more dramatically increased here. So there's more whites. So there's more contrast in a way across a boundary somewhere in here, white to red, very quickly. So here's the effects on some images. I'll do it. This one to me doesn't look very obvious. The saturation is clearly different than the original, at least on my screen. The vibrance and the saturation look a lot alike. If you study it very closely, they are in fact different. If you look down in this area here, the browns are lighter brown than they are here. They've been left behind in the saturation increase. This is a new program out called Radiance, no, I guess it's Radiant Photo, not Radiance Photo, Radiant Photo. And here it is with no vibrance, and here it is with the full vibrance. This, I guess, is the Cave Nebula. And you can see here what vibrance has done to the image. Sure, it's more vibrant. I don't think I like it so much, but maybe a little bit of vibrance would be helpful in this image. Okay, a little bit about color contrast. Color contrast, as contrast does, is the relationship between two colors or two grayscales or two somethings is contrast. So what color contrast does is try to separate warm and cool colors from one another. And enhances the range of colors. So if we had two colors in our image that were here and here, it would try to separate them farther. This is a color wheel, farther on the color wheel from one another, and move this one perhaps up to here and this one perhaps up to here, and they would be further away from each other on the color wheel. Obviously, if we had a color here, we're running this into that color, and so that color would also maybe get adjusted, or maybe it would just simply form a barrier that would not let this one go as far as as it might, and might stop you from increasing the contrast before a point like this. This is all taken care of behind the scenes. You really don't get to choose things like this when adjusting color contrast. I want to say one other thing while we're on color wheels. People show color wheels and talk about them as if they're a spectrum. They are not a spectrum, and I can show you very easily why. Here's red, that's at one end of the spectrum. Here's blue, that's at the other end of the spectrum. So we go around here through yellow, green, and on up to blue, and that's all spectrum. From here to red is something where light in nature does not exist. There is no wavelength for purple. It's a combination of two things, red and blue, that is assembled in our brain that we register as purple. There is no wavelength. The wavelength of red is long. It goes up to blue, which is short, and beyond blue we can't see any colors, and beyond red we can't see any colors. But if we have red and blue and overlapping each other, we see purple. So it's a figment of your imagination. This is interesting because I've seen people measuring using Photoshop, some tool in Photoshop, which supposedly puts a spectrum up on the screen, and then you can click anywhere on it and it'll tell you the proportions of the colors in it. And the talk I was watching clicked on the wavelength of hydrogen alpha, and it said that it had 5% or something like that of purple in it. Well, there is no color purple in outer space, so hydrogen alpha cannot have purple in it. So whatever you take that away. They say it was a spectrum, but it was obviously a color wheel being interpreted as a spectrum. Okay. By the way, color contrast is a good thing, and it changes your photographs and has to be used carefully, but it can bring out a lot of good detail and contrast, color contrast, that really perk up your image. Here's an image before and after. So I took this area, and I think it lies somewhere about here on the image, and this area, and I think it lies about here on the image. I didn't really measure them and try to place them. I just did it by eye. After color contrast is applied strongly, like 100% slider, we get this area turns somewhat aqua from its original color, and this one gets an obvious orange tint. So the program has taken this and moved it up toward aqua. It's taken this orange and moved it, or this brown, and moved it down toward orange. And so this is what color contrast does. And if this had been done a little more delicately, the image would be considerably better looking, I think, than this one. Okay, dehazing. Here's another interesting thing that goes on. Excuse me. What's haze? Well, we all pretty much know about haze. You go out and you see smoky, and, in the summertime, the sky is full of smoke and it causes a haze, and anything you look at is affected by this haze. Fog is another form of haze. Anything in a cloud, thin high clouds, are haze. Anything that absorbs light and scatters light causes haze. And actually this haze has a name. It's called air light, believe it or not. And if you go out researching haze, you might want to look under air light, so you get the effect on images rather than on something else. So haze attenuates the light that reaches the camera, and it degrades contrast and color in the images you capture. Colors appear in lighter tones than they actually are, and edges and details are softened in the image. It's not to say the information isn't there in the image, it's just that the haze is concealing much of it. Our problem is to recognize the haze, or anyone's problem writing a code to dehaze an image, has to figure out a way to estimate the haze and subtract it out of the image. Okay. There was one way of doing it, CLAHE. I don't know whether that's ever pronounced as a word, but it means contrast limited adaptive histogramic equalization. And PixInsight has a histogramic equalization, local histogramic equalization, that is based on this CLAHE technique. However, that technique is reportedly in the literature somewhat flawed. According to them, it makes images look much brighter and unnatural than they actually are. Well, they are natural. Makes them look brighter than they actually are and unnatural. It enhances noise. It reduces the signal to noise ratio and produces a high mean square error that is scattered about the true pixel values in the image. I don't know about you, but none of these things sound particularly good to me. So I haven't used this in ages. I never really liked the way it made my images look. But it's commonly used because it's easily available. There are other ways to do it. There are a lot of other ways. And one is called dark channel prior. And the prior here is a reference to Bayesian statistics, I believe. And the idea is that you search the entire image, not you, but the program searches the entire image for the darkest pixels in it, which may be blacks in reality. In any case, it assumes that they are blacks, and it then goes around the image. It then fits a function to all those black images, which are not really black because they now contain haze in them. And it says, okay, those should all be black, so I can make a surface here and fit a surface to it. And that surface is the haze. And here, for instance, in this image, is what it says the haze is doing to the image. So this is kind of a representation of the haze in the image. It then subtracts this image from that image and gets this image, which is the dehazed image. The problem I have is there are many programs that offer dehazing, and the algorithms they use, I guess, are a proprietary secret of the company that produces the software. It's almost impossible to find out what dehazing method they're using among the dozen or so that are out there. So my recommendation is try a few, see what happens, and settle on the one that seems to perform best for you. Okay, here is an original image and a dehazed image. And you see what the dehazing has done to both the color and the contrast in this image. I believe it's obvious that the contrast is higher in this image. I mean, just look at the difference across this part of the nebula here. This is the hairless mole rat nebula. And here the contrast is much lower. It doesn't, if you're just subtracting something that has a fairly smooth surface, there's no way you can introduce artifacts. So this dark area here, for instance, is the dark area here. It's exactly the same, stands out more here, and there's more contrast and there's more detail in it, perhaps. Over here, for instance, the detail is rather shabby. Over here, we've got better detail, especially with further processing. But that's what dehaze does, and I'm a big advocate of dehazing images, because between us and the object we're imaging, there's our atmosphere, there's, of course, city lights interacting with our atmosphere, there are probably clouds, humidity, and everything else. And then we get outside our atmosphere, and there's intervening stellar debris, clouds, dust, making all this scattering of light. And so this is a way to kind of mitigate at least some of that. I'm going to talk a little bit now about sharpening, and that leads me to another important tool. Most sharpening works by adding contrast to well-established or well easily recognized edges in our picture. It enhances edges, and that's exactly what unsharp masking does, for instance. It enhances edges, and that's why you get those dark rings around things when you use unsharp masking to a higher degree than you actually should. It's a very old method. Unsharp masking was actually developed in film, in dark rooms, using film. You make an image, then you make a blurry version of those images, and then you project through both of those negatives, the blurry and the regular, and lo and behold, you can enhance the sharpness of edges if you blurred your image just right. So it's an old method and is largely abandoned for newer methods, though a great number of people I know still use it, even though I make fun of them and call them names, but they still use it. But anyway, a couple of other methods that are available are clarity, it's a slider, and artificial intelligence, both of which are modern methods. There are others too, wavelet sharpening, though wavelet sharpening is kind of a blunt tool in what it does. These two are a little more controlled. Topaz sharpening AI is gaining popularity in the astro imaging range. But first, let's look at clarity. Clarity is the preferential adjustment of contrast of the image midtones. So neither the brightest things nor the darkest things are very much affected by a clarity tool. A clarity enhances the histogram midtones, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, and this is an example. Here's sharpening, which makes a rather stark kind of thing because it's sharpening all the edges and lines, but not anything else in between. This is an image affected by clarity. I moved this for you, but it doesn't move in PowerPoint. So I think you see that both of them improve over the image in the background, but I think the image intensity and detail is easier to perceive in this image than it is in this one. This one kind of shocks the eyes a little bit. At least that's how I see it. Again, these are applied pretty strongly in both images. Here's clarity on the hairless mole rat image. Only clarity, nothing else has been altered here. Again, this is in Topaz Studio, and here again, it works a lot like the last tool we had, the dehazing, but you can use both of them together because they do different things. But again, you can see much more detail in here than you can in here. At least you can see it easier. And if you look at all these lines here, of course they're still here. And so it's not adding anything, it's just making the things that are there more obvious. Going back to sharpening for just a second. Here's sharpening with artificial intelligence of an image, and here's the sharpening of an unsharp mask. And granted, I applied this pretty strongly, but to make it obvious that this is very granular looking, because all the edges have been enhanced, even if the edges were fairly smooth edges and the smooth edges were more appropriate. It just over enhances everything, puts this blackness in between the bright spots. AI sharpening, by the way, according to the literature, but of course there are different implementations, but AI sharpening does not put in any artifacts. Unsharp masking clearly adds artifacts to the image. Okay. Radiance. It's not universally agreed upon what radiance means. From one program to another. In Aurora, the developers say radiance increases presence, whatever that is. Then they say, think of radiance as the overall presence of color. So I don't know what that means, because I don't know what presence means. The words presence, mood, feeling, and such abstract things occur all the time in describing what tools do. And so if you say something that gives it a cozy feeling, I've seen that. I'm not sure what the image will look like if I want to do it in a cozy feeling. So it's kind of a trial and error thing. Try it. If you don't like it, don't use it. Obviously, in this case, Radiance took an image that was fairly sharp and made it far less sharp, but apparently it made it have more presence. Well, there you go. Okay, glow and the Orton effect. The Orton effect is very similar to the unsharp masking. You take your image, you make an unsharp version of it, and you blend the two together some way or another. So it takes this image and makes it this image, and I don't see anything in this image that I like as compared to the original image. So I never use the Orton effect. Equalization. Equalization is, in general, the broad one. We talked about local histogram equalization, but broadly, histogram equalization means flattening out your histogram. Wikipedia says that histogram equalization often produces unrealistic effects in photographs, but it may be useful in false color images. In Insight, generalized hyperbolic stretch videos seem to push the idea of flattening the histograms, at least somewhat, which may not, in fact, be the thing to do, given the comment above about it making the images look unrealistic. I have played with the generalized hyperbolic stretch and found I didn't really care for the results, and I could do the same things using the curves in PixInsight. But if you like it, do it. It's probably not as this kind of example up here. There are other ways to improve the dynamic range of an image. And for instance, tone mapping is a competitor with equalization, and I like it better. Brilliance is the joint perception of brightness and colorfulness of an image or a place in an image. Increasing brilliance involves increasing brightness and saturation, probably along with some tone mapping. And that's a quote along with this quote in the next one. It seems likely that no two programs implemented in the same way. And it's, again, this is a reflection of somebody who is frustrated trying to look up what brilliance is doing in the program he or she is using. I don't know. I avoid it, but maybe it'll work for you. Here, okay, the next thing is a little bit about denoising, and I'm going to just compare two popular versions of denoising, or two popular algorithms for denoising. And the way I'm doing that is I'm going to start here with our hairless mole rat nebula. And I took it, this is a processed version, and I'm going to add noise to it. Hope you can see that this one's had noise added to it. You can see here on its cheeks there, quite a bit of noise. And I'm going to work on this noised image and try to restore the starting image to some degree. Or maybe even do better than restoring the starting image. Okay, here's AI denoise. Now this again is in Topaz, and they don't tell you what they're doing. I'm suspicious that they're not only applying a denoise to this, an artificial intelligence denoise, but they're also sharpening the image. They don't tell you it does that, I don't believe, though their documentation is constantly in flux. So maybe I just missed the month where they discussed that. But in any case, I think here's the original, and here's the final, and then we have more detail in the final than we have in the original, and the noise is gone from the final image pretty cleanly. There are no artifacts obvious in this image, and again, AI denoising is not supposed to produce artifacts, and so it looks like a pretty good thing to do. This is Topaz Denoise. This is not Topaz Studio. It's a separate program that you have to pay for separately. Okay, here's the starting image, and here's TGV denoise in PixInsight. It's applied as delicately and as minimally as I could apply it and still get the noise out to the level that it was in the previous image, in the AI image. And obviously in this one, we've lost some detail in it. It's a sad fact, but other than AI denoise, as far as I know, every sharpening method is an averaging method. It smooths or averages something across the image. Wavelets, if you want to denoise using wavelets, for instance, removing the lower wavelet, that means you're losing high frequency information in your image along with the noise that you're removing. And that's kind of where most sharpening occurs, but the AI doesn't suffer from that. Okay, here's the two to compare TGV AI. I have numerous tools for denoising, and the only one I use now is AI. Well, that takes me to the end, and all I want to tell you is common tools such as saturation, brightness, and contrast act on an image pretty much the way you would expect it to across virtually all applications. More exotic tools like Vibrance, Radiance, Brilliance may act differently in different tools, and so you're left with a trial and error to figure out if you like it at all and which tool you like it best with. Still, other tools such as color contrast can be extraordinarily helpful with most images, but sometimes they're of little use in the image if the color contrast is already there, or the colors are so variable that perhaps there's no room to move around one color relative to another. That's all I have. I hope this information helps you a little bit in your image processing, or at least gives you an idea where you might go, what kinds of things you might be interested in looking up to improve your image processing. That's it for me. It's open for questions.
That was great, Alex, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions. I really liked the presentation on the color wheel. That was very helpful, particularly the example you showed where things get moved around. So floor is open and Alex is available, so hit him with your questions.
All clear as mud, huh? All this stuff takes a long time to digest, and all you can do is keep plowing at it if you aren't already an expert. I mean, I think it took me 7 years to figure out most of it, and I'm still struggling with it, and that's why I gave this presentation, is to find out what some of these things actually are. So, yeah. Any questions you have, by the way, you can always drop a note through our web page, not web page, our, what is it, email page there, our group page, and I'd be glad to try to answer or point you to some place that has the answer. Also, you're always welcome to email me directly, and the easiest way to do that would probably be to find me on Astrobin. Just look up Alex Woronow, and then send me a private message through there. If neither of those work, my email is alex@ one word, faintlightphotography.com. Alex@faintlightphotography.com. So I'm always anxious to share things and help. I was a teacher for most of my career, and I can't stop.
All right, questions? No questions. Well, that's pretty cool. Alex,
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a retired newspaper photographer. I've been using Topaz AI Denoise and Gigapixel AI on regular photos. Have you tried those on any of your regular photos?
You know, I don't take regular photos very much anymore. Even with a cell phone, somehow I've just sort of stopped taking pictures. Like, you know, in the olden days, I actually had 4x5, 8x10 Deerdorf film cameras, and no image processing at all, other than what you can do in a darkroom. But I've never.
I've gotten some pretty amazing results from those two software, just on regular images, photos.
Yeah, Topaz is a spectacularly useful image processing program. There's a new one that just came out, I don't know, Thursday. It's called Radiant Photo. And Radiant Photo does some things that Topaz doesn't do that you may find interesting. It has an artificial intelligence front end, and when you bring an image into it, it analyzes using AI, it analyzes your image for content and drops it into one of several categories. And one is nightscape, which works for astro images, but others are seascape, landscape, cityscape, portraits, and all these things. And it immediately applies corrections to the image or adjustments to the image. And frankly, it says if you use Photoshop, don't do anything in Photoshop before you drop it into this program, and you may well find that you don't need Photoshop at all. Just dropping it in, that gets you a big head start. But it still has a whole mess of sliders that you can play with, and it's got a trial version.
Alex, you talked a little bit about single image tone mapping, and I recently got a copy of Affinity Photo. I think it was $55 or $60, and it does pretty much everything Photoshop does, but it has a really interesting HDR application for single image tone mapping. And the example you gave was really well done, and I found that the tool in Affinity Photo does a really nice job of that as well. Yeah,
there's that one. There's a single one in Aurora HDR, I believe. Those are the two that I use. I use the one you mentioned as well as Aurora. It's a good thing to do to your images. It stretches out the parts that need to be stretched out, or very often without much effort at all.
Yeah, it's nice too when you can apply them at different levels, so that you can, as you so aptly demonstrated, move the slider up to 100%, but then dial it back to get the exact amount you want. So.
Yeah, the dialing back is usually effectively mixing the original image with the processed image, HDR image, and I often bail out too soon and then mix back later in PixInsight to correct my error of not doing the mixing at the time.
Hey, yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
Do you use PixInsight ever?
Did I use it?
Uh-huh.
I use PixInsight for extensively, yeah. Almost all pre-processing, that is up to and including stretching the images, I use PixInsight. After I've stretched the images, I jump over to Topaz and do my post-processing in Topaz, and then back into PixInsight for some final little bitty tweaks, like I'll do a cosmetic and change here and there, just little things. And then back to something like Topaz gigapixel to crop and present it in format that I want, PNG, TIFF, whatever. But I use a lot of PixInsight.
Okay. Which one do you use like to clean up the background, to get rid of the background noise?
That's all done Topaz Denoise.
Oh.
In PixInsight, there's a new plugin that you can purchase called Noise Exterminator. And if you look up at noise with the letter X and then Terminator, I think it's around $60. Is that about right? It works pretty well. It's probably about 90% of what Topaz Denoise is. Topaz Denoise is often on sale for around the same price, but you have to leave PixInsight and use it and then go back in if that's what you need more to do more processing. So usually when I have my images, just early on, before I remove stars, which I do in PixInsight with one of the two programs, codes that are available for that, I run the denoise in PixInsight, the noise exterminator. Then I remove the stars. Then I pass it out to Topaz, the one without the stars, and then I denoise it again out there. And it takes out the rest of it because, like I say, Topaz Denoise is better.
Okay. Because I'm just kind of new with PixInsight. This is the first I've heard about Topaz, by the way.
Yeah, I think they may have a free version, to a trial version. It's pretty easy to use.
That was kind of like PixInsight. Is that way too.
Yeah.
What is it how much is it if you actually purchase it?
Purchase the Topaz?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm not up on the price, but I think it's commonly on sale for around $60 to $80, something like that. I have a suite. I have 4 or 5 of their programs, which I bought all at once, and it was about $200 for Topaz Studio, which is the one that I do most of the processing in, Topaz Denoise, Topaz Sharpen, Topaz Adjust. I think those 4. And there's a Topaz mask generator, which really doesn't work very well with astro images. But the others all work well. The Adjust is one of those that uses a single image HDR. Yeah.
Alex, I have a question.
Okay.
What file format do you use when you're processing your pictures?
When I export them to Topaz or something like that, inside I do all my processing in sRGB because that's the only thing you're going to get when you go outside, and I don't want to have some other algorithm mapping my colors around. So I do sRGB color space. I import and work with the what's it called, XSIF or whatever it is in PixInsight. I keep all of those files. When I go out to Topaz, I export a 32-bit TIFF. Topaz reads it just fine, but it can only output a 16-bit TIFF. So that's what I end up with at the end. Now, like I said, 16 is far more color grayscales levels than your screen can show or a printer can print. So there's really not too much loss there. I don't feel too badly about that, but I avoid doing 8-bit. If there are programs out there that I have tried and they only output an 8-bit image, and I dump them pretty quickly. I don't want to deal with
Thank you.
something like that.
All right, any other questions for Alex? All right, we have a few minutes left. Anybody have any other questions or concerns or images that they'd like to share with the group?
Oh, I have an image I'd like to share.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. I hit share here. What is it, folks? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep, we see it.
What is it? Well, this is M101. This is probably the best image I've ever taken. A while back, I showed you the, it was just barely processed, and it took me a while to figure out how to apply the colors, and I finally did it. This was taken with PixInsight. This was taken with my 6-inch refractor. It's 12, it's a composite of 12 5-minute exposures using an ASI 2600 MC Pro Astro camera. And well, one thing I've got to tell you though, I've been trying to process several of my other images, and I haven't been able to get the background like this. I keep getting a noisy background. And that's why I was trying to ask about, I don't know if anybody had any answers to that. I'm almost going to need somebody to walk me through an image process. I managed to do this, and I used the color calibration function in PixInsight, and this worked real well. Gave you the images were very muted; they were almost white. And then when I went over to the curves transformation, I was able to get what I got. Just only one thing that's a slight mystery, and that's this green that's in the camera somehow responded. Now you notice there's no green anywhere else in the whole frame. The image, the colors are pretty accurate, and I'll blow this up a little bit. And notice the nebular regions, the H2 regions in the galaxy come out nice hot pink, which they usually, the hydrogen alpha, you know, came through very nicely. But, and then in the center, we've got a nice yellow with the population 2 stars. Out on the edges, got a nice deep blue, lots of by the way, this galaxy is a hot item here. It's full of O and B stars. But somehow in that intermediate region here, it came out a bit greenish. That was just a little bit of a mystery. I don't know whether that was just the way something about the spectral response of the camera, or it could just be the composite light of the that portion of that zone in the galaxy is heavily populated with both O and B stars and some of the older cooler stars like you know, yellowish, and the composite came out green, which it would be. We were talking about that color wheel a little bit earlier about that when you get red and blue and you got green in the middle. But and of course we all know there's no such thing as a green star. But that's the only thing that was a little bit of a mystery. But I'm very pleased with the color here, and and the way this turned out. And this arm over here is totally invisible, even in the 40-inch at CAC. You can't see this. Maybe on it would have to be a really clear night. And I was able to capture this with an hour's worth of integration time through a 6 lousy inches of aperture, produced this image. So I think, and probably 20 years ago, you would have needed at least a 24-inch to get this, or especially in the days of film, I would have to suspect. We got quite a bit of resolution. I compared it with a photo taken with the 200-inch using spectroscopic film in the Hubble Atlas of Galaxies. If any of you have a copy of that, you can check it out. Well, there is considerably better resolution on that one, but this is a sizable percentage of the resolution that I got here.
Okay, can anyone help Paul out with the green coloration, where that may have come from?
Yes. Okay. Who is it? Okay. Okay. Who's speaking? I'm not seeing you right now. I'm just seeing my image here. Hello? Hey, did we lose you?
No, Paul, I just asked if anyone had any comments on why you got so much green.
Yeah. Because elsewhere, the color, I mean, I can't get rid of it. Without the whole thing turning, the background will all go back, it goes red. But otherwise, they were talking about color contrast. He was Alex in his talk. And when I brought these colors up, the features came out really nice. Now, one thing I have to say, though, that I should maybe throw out, colors have scientific as well as aesthetic value. And they help you identify what is in, even if the colors are not entirely accurate. They will tell you a lot about what the contents, especially in a galaxy like this. And like if you've got a lot of these red things, we know that those are ionized hydrogen clouds. And of course, it'll also tell you a lot about the stellar content that's in here. I mean, this blue, these are obviously lots of, well, the arms and spiral galaxies often are blue, especially so in this galaxy. And even these outer things, even this little appendage here, you can't see this visually. Much less these really, even out here came out, they're very faint, but you can see them there. You can see them with some definition. These really faint spiral arms down here on this side where I'm pointing. Then even over here, there was a lot of stuff I didn't realize was in this galaxy until I took this image. There's also what's most likely a little dwarf companion galaxy to M101 right here. Looks like a little irregular, something like NGC 6822 is in Sagittarius to our galaxy. It would be much smaller than any of the Magellanic Clouds.
Paul, one of the things that sometimes happens with one-shot color cameras is the software that debayers the image sometimes is incorrect, and you can get some strange colors from that. So I'm not sure how that works in PixInsight, but you may want to check to make sure that the debayering of the original images is happening correctly, because if that's not correct, when you do the color calibration, you may get some strange results.
Yeah, well, the color calibration hasn't been working for me on some of my other images. It'll do one thing that I keep getting in PixInsight is clipping. So much where you get just the nucleus of it goes dark immediately, and it takes out all the pixels. Like just the ones that, like, sometimes you'll get just the nucleus of a galaxy, and when I'm trying to get rid of the noise in the background. Now I noticed that when you know, I've done also there's there's automatic background extraction as well as dynamic background extraction. And I'm sure those of you who use PixInsight, and I tried, sometimes the automatic will seem good. You get a nice even background to get started. Then when I start to bring up the colors, another problem I've been having too is that the background goes up and down much more than the actual image. And I'm trying to get some trying to bring out the subtle features and trying to take it down. The background just all of a sudden, or else the thing, instead of trying to dim the image slightly, it clips. I'm starting to call PixInsight the Alberta Clipper. That's a meteorological term, the weather phenomenon in the winter.
Can I make a suggestion? This might help and this might not. If I can share my screen, I think you're still sharing, Paul.
Wait a minute. Let's see. I don't know if I'm hitting. You are screen sharing, I'm saying right now. I've got that here.
Yeah, it says yeah. So if you can drop out of the screen sharing, I'll show you.
Oh, okay. Stop share. Okay. All right.
And now I'm going to share my screen. Okay, you should see a PixInsight.
Yes.
Here
Okay.
it says RGB working space. RGB working space. I keep mine set at uniform colors. This, I don't know what it really affects, how much it affects things, but the default is for these values that are used within most software, and the default in PixInsight is the same. And I'll go to the default and show you what it looks like. The default has 71% green.
Okay.
And the reason for that is most people take pictures here on Earth, and there are a lot of trees and grass here on Earth. And so the universal standard is to set green intensity, the luminance of green higher than the luminances of other things. Blue is only 6% and red 22%. So I put in here, I just put in, you know, one, make them all the same. One, and then put normalized luminance. And then I do that. Every time I enter PixInsight to do a program and start, I do this. I don't know whether it makes any difference.
What's this one called, this function?
RGB working space.
RGB working space.
Yeah, how about that, huh? Okay. Right there it is, it's in the processes. Here I opened up the all processes, and there's RGB working space. Like I say, I'm not sure what the influence of that is, but I know I don't want to emphasize greens anywhere at any time, so I change it.
Great, that might help.
Yeah. Okay. And you say do them and you have equal amounts of those colors, is that it?
Yeah, I do uniform. I don't know whether any other, I've never tried anything else. I don't know, maybe red and blue could be boosted relative to green. But the thing is, if you want to have colors in there in a narrow band like orange or something like that, you're going to need the green. And so I just make them all equal.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm using a one-shot color, so.
Yeah, I suspect that it may, like Greg said, it's probably somewhere in the debayering that it's emphasizing the green, but I don't know much of debayering.
Now, well, even when I get it out of, when the image comes out raw, first there's a greenish tint. Well, sometimes first the background sky is all green, and then then you have to I know that they say push control and something else on the computer, and it removes it. So then now you've got it dark, but the images, usually the galaxies or whatever the subject matter still has a slight greenish tint.
Yeah, there's a tool called SCNR, which is some sort of noise removal tool.
Yeah, I use that.
You use that because
Okay.
you have to use that one carefully. If you take out all the green, your image is going to look pretty bad. But
Okay.
you can try delicately applying SCNR to the green channel. But it's coming from the fact, ultimately, that your one-shot color camera has 2 green pixels for every 1 red and 1
Yes,
blue.
I know about that. I've seen the schematic shown for that.
Yeah.
The way that I know about that, and it's a little bit too much. I would have liked to have seen uh, equal pixels. Each
Yeah.
color, give each color equal time.
Yeah.
RGB.
Okay.
Okay.
Are there any other questions, comments, or images that folks want to share?
Greg, I have a couple.
Okay.
I'll start a share. And okay. I have been doing this for only 6 months, so I'm a real newbie.
Okay.
But this is Andromeda that I've captured over the last 2 weeks. Just a couple of nights. It's about 294 subs, 45-second subs. All the processing in PixInsight, which it's been a lot of fun learning. But I feel like I'm getting there.
Yeah, that's very good.
And I have another one that I just processed from last night. This is
M33.
the triangulum.
Yeah.
Or the
M33.
pinwheel.
Oh wow, you brought those. See, now I didn't realize there were that many H2 regions in that field, in that galaxy.
It's pretty rich. I can see that I still need to do more processing up here, but I like the image and I like the depth of it. I'm shooting with the 2600 also. And
isn't that a fantastic camera though?
Yeah, I started with the 533, but I have to say I'm much more enamored of the 2600.
Yeah, well, it uses the same pixels and everything, but
It does.
2600 is just more of them. It's a bigger sensor.
Yeah, and I like the field of view.
Yeah. Oh, it's a fantastic unit. It's
The next thing you need to do on that image, next thing I would do on that image, you don't need to do anything, would be to flatten it using one of the image flattening routines, and that would balance the colors across the entire screen, so that you don't have red above and green below. Or blue
Yeah, I'm not certain why that's there because I did not see that in the original image when I was processing it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to go back and look at it and see why it's like that.
How did you do your flats?
I have flats that are calibrated and I think they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Okay, I got to figure out how to get out of share now.
what processing? What program did you use, or what kind of?
I've only learned one program, and that's PixInsight. And
okay,
I started using it in the middle of February, and I feel like I'm still doing baby steps trying to get through it.
Oh yeah, me too. I'm. It's There is by the way, a guide that you can purchase on. It's an he used to put it out. There's a gentleman in California that it's like $25. You can get documentation and for PixInsight.
Oh, well, PixInsight is kind of rich in documentation. There's a lot there in in almost every single tool that it has. If you look, it's got pretty good documentation.
All right, well, thank you for sharing those, Vincent, and hopefully you can figure out how to get that background flattened a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure I will.
Okay. All right, well, I just wanted to mention that our next meeting will be, again, on the third Monday of the month. That next month will be October 17th. And as usual, we're always looking for topics for future meetings. So if you have a suggestion for a topic for a future meeting, you can email me directly with your suggestion. I'm particularly interested in your suggestions if you're willing to lead a discussion like Alex volunteered to do this evening. So if you have some particular topic that you're very interested in and you'd like to kick off a discussion, please let me know and I'll be sure and set you up for one of our future meetings. All right, so thank you all for attending. I'll try to post the recording of this meeting tomorrow. And as Alex mentioned, he's gonna send a copy of his PowerPoint so you can go directly to that if you don't wanna watch the entire recording. So again, thanks for attending and we'll see you again next month.
Okay.